Ever notice how some people just always seem to get what they want? Like, you're working with someone and they always seem to win over the boss. Or maybe there's that friend, the type who could talk anyone into doing, well, anything.
Yeah, yeah. I know exactly what you mean.
It's like, what's their secret? What do they know that I don't? And that's what we're going to dig into today, right? We're
Mm.
doing a deep dive into manipulation and persuasion.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because you start to look closer and you realize how often there really is a method to it.
Oh, yeah.
These people who are just like effortlessly influential.
Totally. And we're using Leonard Moore's Manipulation 6 manuscripts as our guide, so we're going deep. But don't worry, this isn't about like turning you into some master manipulator.
No, no, not at all. Think of it more like we're handing you a new lens,
Yeah.
a way to actually see these tactics in action and to understand like the why behind how they work. And hey, maybe even learn how to use them ethically yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like gaining X-ray vision into human behavior. Now, Moore kicks things off with some like core concepts to, set the stage. So let's start with manipulation. What are we really talking about here?
Well, I think a lot of people, when they hear manipulation, they picture like these evil masterminds, right?
Hmm.
But Moore, he defines it a bit differently. He talks about it as influencing someone, but they don't even realize it's happening. And it often works by like subtly guiding their choices through these external factors.
So it's not so much about like direct control. It's more about this kind of like under the radar influence.
Exactly. It's subtle.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. Can you give us like an example from the book, something that really shows what this looks like in action?
Sure, yeah. One of the examples that Moore gives is, let's say you're interested in someone, right?
Yeah.
And you want to ask them out on a date. Now, the manipulative approach isn't to just like come out, ask directly. It's more about like subtly planting that seed.
Yeah.
Like casually mentioning, oh, do you go on dates often? Just like slipping that idea into their mind without them even realizing it.
Ooh, sneaky. Okay, so how is that different from persuasion then? Because, I mean, those two things kind of seem like they're in the same family.
Yeah, well, that's where it gets a little more nuanced. See, persuasion is more about like skillfully encouraging someone to do what you want, but without making them feel pressured about it. So it's not about being like forceful.
I guess, like, convincing someone can feel very, like, in your face, but persuasion is more about being, well, persuasive.
Exactly.
So if I'm understanding this right, it's kind of like manipulation is more like pulling strings from the shadows, while persuasion is more like, being a charismatic conductor, leading the orchestra.
That's a great way to put it.
All right, so we've got manipulation, persuasion, and are you ready for this? Moore throws in another term, secret hypnosis.
Okay. Yeah.
I know, right? Hold on to your hats, everybody. So are we talking like swinging pocket watches and all that?
No, not quite that dramatic. But it is about kind of understanding how to tap into someone's subconscious, right? To make them, let's say, a little more receptive to whatever it is you might be suggesting. And Moore is very clear about this. It's not about using this for like mind control or anything like that. It's really more about just understanding how our subconscious minds work and how we can communicate more effectively with ourselves and with others.
Okay, so less about making someone like cluck like a chicken and more about like really understanding the psychology behind influence.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. But, okay, this is all great in theory, but how does this stuff actually play out in the real world, right? Because Moore doesn't just leave us hanging with these like definitions, right?
Oh, absolutely not. He gives us some really interesting scenarios straight from the book to really show how these concepts actually work in action.
Okay, well, hit me with one. Lay it on me. I'm ready to put on my manipulation analyst hat.
All right. Scenario 1, the potato masher masterclass. So picture this. You've got this like really charming salesperson, super charismatic, using like repetition and just like this air of genuine enthusiasm to sell. Wait for it. A ridiculously expensive potato masher.
Wait, hold on. Who is dropping like serious cash on a potato mash?
Exactly. That's where the manipulation comes in, right?
Right.
Because they never, and I mean never mention the price. Not until the customer is like fully invested, totally drawn in by all the,
By all the potato mashing hype.
the hype.
Okay, yeah, I see where you're going with this. It's like they're weaving this spell around this potato masher, making it seem like this like essential kitchen tool you can't live without.
And to really seal the deal, they'll throw in these little bits of proof,
Yeah.
right? Like they might casually mention how they had this one customer that had terrible arthritis and they could never make their famous mashed potatoes. Well, guess what? Not anymore, thanks to this miracle masher.
Oh, come on. That's just plain dirty. Okay, okay, give me another one. What's the next manipulation masterpiece we're gonna dissect?
All right. Next up, we have the lobster trap, a little romantic intrigue.
Oh, I love it. Okay, lay it on me.
So you've got this situation where a woman, she wants to go on a date with this guy, right? But instead of just coming out and saying it, she kind of sets this trap, you could say.
It's like psychological jujitsu. I love it. Okay, but how does she pull it off?
Well, it's subtle. She starts by kind of casually putting herself in this certain light, right?
Uh,
Emphasizing qualities that she knows he'll find desirable, like, oh, she's very mature for her age, she's got great taste. And maybe she'll slip in how she's gone on dates with other guys who are lacking in these areas.
So it's like she's creating this contrast without actually having to say, those other guys were losers.
Exact.
And then when he, like, totally on his own suggests, I don't know, like a mature date at some nice lobster place, bam, she's already positioned herself as the perfect date.
He's walked right into the lobster trap.
I need to take notes on this.
Yeah.
This is incredible. Okay. What about scenario number 3? Give me the grand finale.
All right. This one, we go from romance to the corporate world. We'll call this the subtle power play.
Ooh, I like it.
So picture this. You've got an ambitious employee gunning for a promotion. Now, instead of resorting to like backstabbing or any of those like really aggressive tactics, she takes a more, let's say, nuanced approach. She'll use things like flattery, strategically reminding her boss of her competence, her accomplishments, and she'll even plant these subtle suggestions to kind of nudge him in the direction she wants to go.
So, no, like supervillain moves, just strategic manipulation to get ahead.
Exactly. It's all about subtly shaping how her boss perceives her, and she does it all without ever being directly threatening.
Wow. What strikes me about all these examples is like Moore isn't just showing us manipulation in some vacuum. It's like he's pulling back the curtain on how this shows up in so many different areas of life. This stuff is everywhere.
Oh, yeah. And that's exactly why it's so important to be able to recognize it. Right? That's like the first step in protecting yourself from being manipulated, which of course leads to the question, how do we actually spot these tactics in action before we become the potato getting mashed? Well, it's not always easy, right? Because manipulators, they often rely on these subtle cues, these things we might not even pick up on if we're not paying attention.
So you're saying it's not always some big, obvious, over-the-top gesture. It's the sneakier stuff we really need to watch out for.
Exactly. And Moore actually breaks down a bunch of techniques to watch out for. One that's surprisingly common is mirroring.
Okay, so like holding up an actual mirror to my soul, that seems a tad dramatic, don't you think?
Think more along the lines of someone subtly copying your behavior. Not in a weird way, but as a way to like build rapport. It could be something as simple as like matching your posture. Or maybe they casually repeat a phrase you just used, like they're trying to show you they're on the same wavelength.
Oh, yeah. Wow. I've totally had people do that. And, it can be kind of flattering, right? Like, oh, wow, we're totally vibing here.
Right. And that's the whole point. When it's done well, mirroring can create this like subconscious feeling of like connection, trust. But, and this is the big but, you want to be wary if it feels calculated,
Yeah.
Like they're trying way too hard.
So less like a genuine connection and more like a chameleon changing its colors to blend in.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Now, another tactic that Moore talks about is creating this us versus them mentality.
Oh, I see this one all the time. It's like those marketing campaigns that are all like, join the club of people who know better. Or like, are you tired of being left behind?
Yes, exactly. It's all about kind of messing with your sense of belonging, like tapping into that very human need to be part of something and then using that to influence your choices.
Man, this is starting to feel like I need a decoder ring just to get through a normal conversation.
Right.
Okay, so mirroring us versus them. What other mind games do I need to be on the lookout for?
Okay, this next one is a classic. Using fear, then swooping in with the solution. You see it everywhere, right? Advertising, politics, even just in our everyday conversations when things get emotionally charged.
Oh, yeah. Like, are you worried about X? Well, our product is the answer you've been waiting for.
Yes. You create a problem, then you amplify the person's anxiety about it, and then, ta-da, you position yourself as the hero with the perfect answer.
It's like Moore is giving us this secret playbook of human psychology.
And the more we understand these tactics, the more we can kind of reclaim our own autonomy, right?
Yeah.
Make decisions from a place of awareness rather than feeling like we're being played.
Knowledge is power. So beyond like these specific manipulation tactics, Moore also talks about this broader skill of just like analyzing people in general, which I'm super intrigued by. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's like this. It's not just about being able to spot when someone's trying to manipulate you, right? It's about understanding the why behind human behavior, period, even if there's no manipulative intent whatsoever. And one of the things that Moore talks about is this idea of establishing a baseline for someone's kind of like typical behavior.
So like you're creating a character profile for them in your head, getting to know their like quirks and tendencies, their normal patterns.
Exactly. And once you got that baseline, you're in a much better place to notice any deviations from it.
Like if your friend is usually like super laid back, but suddenly they're like super on edge, you know something's up.
Exactly. It's those subtle shifts that can tell you a lot. And then, there are those little word clues that Moore dives into. He talks about how those like seemingly insignificant words that we use can actually reveal a lot about our underlying like thoughts, motivations.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Give me an example. What are some of these word clues I should be paying attention to?
Well, he gives this example of someone who uses the word again a lot, right? Like, oh, they won an award again, or they accomplished something notable again. And it seems kind of harmless, but Moore suggests that it might point to this deeper need for validation, like they really want to be seen as more accomplished than they maybe actually are.
Wow, I would never have picked up on that. That's so subtle.
It is. But it highlights how much we can learn if we're just paying attention to those like nuances of language. Another thing that Moore delves into is the power of environment.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so he talks about how someone's surroundings, their environment, and how comfortable they seem in that environment, it can offer these clues about them too, like their lifestyle, their social status, even their own self-image.
So for example, like if someone's super awkward and out of place at like, I don't know, a fancy restaurant, it might be a sign that they're not used to that kind of setting, which could tell you something about their background, their, usual social circles.
Exactly. It's like you're piecing together a puzzle,
Yeah.
right? And you're taking all these different observations, their behavior, their words, their environment to get this more complete picture of who they are.
Okay, I have to say, this is all super fascinating. It's like we're getting this like behind the scenes look at human behavior. But before we get too carried away with our newfound skills as like human lie detectors, we got to talk about the ethics of all this, right?
Yeah.
Because this is powerful stuff. Because I mean, we're talking about getting a glimpse behind the curtain of like how people tick, right? But with that knowledge, we got to be careful not to abuse it.
100%. And, Moore, he really emphasizes this throughout the book. He's very clear that these techniques, they can be used for good, absolutely. But they can also be used to take advantage of people, which is, not cool. So it all comes down to self-awareness and like having some strong moral boundaries.
So it's less about becoming like a master manipulator, yanking everybody's chains to get what you want. It's more about using this knowledge responsibly.
Exactly.
Ethically, with good intentions.
Right. And I think it's important to remember, too, that manipulation, it's not this like black and white thing, It's more like a spectrum. Like we all engage in these subtle forms of influence every single day.
Oh, for sure. Like how we dress to make a certain impression, or even just the way we phrase something when we're trying to get our point across.
Exactly.
Like influence is just like baked into how we interact as humans.
It really is. Which brings us to, I think, a really crucial point. Sometimes the most powerful form of influence, it's actually authenticity.
I love that. It's like in this world where everybody's trying to be like super clever and use all these, tactics and stuff, just being genuine can be its own superpower.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, building real trust, like genuine trust, it's going to be way more effective and way more sustainable than relying on any kind of manipulation tactic, right? Because manipulation, it can create these like short-term wins, maybe.
Yeah.
But real trust, that's what builds those lasting connections in relationships.
Right, exactly. It's about like connecting with people on a human level, being real with them. Now, speaking of sneaky tactics, I got to ask about those subliminal messages that Moore talks about. Because, like, is this where we get into, like, full-blown brainwashing territory?
People hear subliminal messages, and they often jump to that, that mind control scenario. But it's not quite like that. While subliminal messages are a real thing, they're not some, like, magic bullet for controlling someone's mind. It's more accurate to think of them as these really subtle cues, these things that can influence our thoughts and behaviors without us even realizing it.
Okay, so, like, what Those hidden images they used to put in advertisements that are supposed to make you crave popcorn at the movies.
Exactly. Or even just using certain words or phrases that, like studies have shown, can trigger specific emotions or associations.
Hmm.
But here's the thing, and Moore really emphasizes this. Subliminal messages. They're most effective when they're aligned with our existing desires or beliefs. So it's less about planting some brand new idea in your head and more about, like, amplifying something that's already there.
So it's like they're playing on our existing tendencies or predispositions.
Exactly. And look, they can be used unethically, but it's not all doom and gloom, right? Like subliminal messages, they can also be tools for good. Like therapists use them sometimes. There are even self-improvement programs that incorporate them. And yeah, marketing too. So
Hmm.
again, it really comes down to awareness,
Hmm.
you know, knowing what to look for. So we're not just passively soaking up these messages without realizing what they are.
Yeah, because even the most subtle forms of influence can really impact our choices if we're not careful.
Exactly. It all comes back to that self-awareness piece
Hmm.
and, being active participants in our own decision-making processes.
And that's what all boils down to, isn't it? Understanding human behavior. Because
Yeah.
it is complex, it's fascinating, it's constantly evolving.
And the more we learn about it, the better equipped we are to really navigate our relationships, our careers, even just our own inner worlds.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing, if you had to pick one thing, that you hope our listeners take away from all of this? What's that thought provoking nugget you want them to hold on to?
There's this one point that Moore makes that really stuck with me. He says that the most skilled manipulators, the real pros, they don't actually lie.
Interesting.
They just frame the truth in a way that benefits them.
Ooh,
Right.
okay. That's good. That's a good one. So it's not so much about like outright deception, but it's about using words, using framing to subtly influence how someone else sees that truth.
Exactly. Which I think leads to a really interesting question for everyone listening. Think about a recent interaction you had with someone. Now, knowing what you know now, were you being subtly manipulated? And if so, how did that make you feel? Were there any like subtle cues that maybe you missed in the moment?
Ooh, that's a great question. I love that. And, I think at the end of the day, this whole deep dive, it's not just about decoding other people's behavior, right? It's about understanding our own role in this whole dance of influence, right? Like the choices that we make, the ways that we influence others, and the ways that we allow ourselves to be influenced. It's about becoming more aware of all of it.
It's about empowering ourselves to show up in our interactions with more awareness, more intentionality, with more authenticity.
I love it. So, to everyone listening, keep exploring those complexities, keep questioning your assumptions, and as always, keep diving deep into this endlessly fascinating world of human behavior. Until next time, everybody.